Good afternoon and welcome to FunBikes TV. My name's James. Today we're going to be building an 800 watt mini quad bike. As you can see, we've already removed the quad from the bike. Before you start assembly, you will need to remove the front bull bar from the quad using some wire cutters, trim the cable tie and remove the front bull bar. You'll have also had come in the packaging the front rack and a cardboard box that contains your bar pad, your charger, your maintenance toolkit, your cable for your charger, and a bag containing various nuts, bolts for the assembly of the quad. You will also have in here the warning sheet regarding battery maintenance and the manual for your quad, along with a couple of caps to go over the bolts on the rear wheels. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is attach the lower shock bolts through into the swing arm to put that into position. You'll find in the bag of various nuts and bolts, you received 4 long bolts and 4 shorter bolts. You need to use 2 of the shorter bolts to attach the front suspension. You will also need 2 of the 4 nylock nuts. For this, lift up the swing arm and align the shocks with the mounting points. You may find you just need to twist the bottom of the shock absorber slightly to get the bolt to line up with the holes. Once you've placed the bolts through the holes, using a 10 and 13 spanner or ratchet combination, put the bolts through and then fully tighten the bolts up. Once you've fully tightened the bolt, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the thread. This helps to stop things from vibrating loose on the vehicle. While we're working this area, we're also going to make sure that the front swing arm is tight using a 12 and 14 spanner combination. Again, once this is tight, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. We now need to check to make sure the top shock bolts are tight on the vehicle. We're now going to tighten the upper shock bolts using 10 and 13 spanner again. The inside nut can be awkward to get onto. Do both sides at the same time. Once you're happy they are tight, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. We're now going to make sure that the rose joint mounting bolts on the trackward ends are tight on both the inside and the outside using a 6 Allen key and a 13 spanner. Turn the steering slightly one direction, it makes it easier to get the Allen key in to the inside rose joints. Once you've done this, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads and repeat the process on the opposite side of the quad. We're now ready to fit the handlebars and the key barrel to the vehicle. We're now going to fit the handlebars onto the quad. To do this, you'll need the 4 longer bolts that came in the nut and bolt pack and the 4 handlebar clamps. You will find that the 2 of the handlebar clamps are totally smooth on the bottom and 2 of them have little ridges cut out of them for the bolt heads. The smooth ones will go onto the bottom of the stem underneath the handlebars, and the ones with the ridges will sit on top. Remove the packaging from the handlebars. Place one of your lower clamps onto the handlebars and lift the bars over the top of the stem, making sure your cables are routed on each side. You'll also see on the handlebars there are some grooves cut into them. These are to help you to align the clamps in the correct position. Making sure your handlebars are central using the guidelines so it's an equal amount coming out the clamp on each side, and then making sure that your handlebars are in line with the steering column so that this centre bar sits an equal distance between the 2 bolt heads. You will then tighten up the handlebars on the vehicle. When you tighten them up, do one side loosely first, also do the front or the back loosely first. Then as you tighten the bars, double check your positions and angles, and try to make sure the gap in the front and the back is equal on the handlebars as you tighten them for the gap in between the clamps. Once you're happy that these are fully tightened and the gaps are equal, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the threads. Now that we've fitted the handlebars, we need to level off the levers. Obviously this is not a comfortable position for your hands to be while riding the quad. So what you'll need to do is, using the 5 Allen key, loosen off the levers on both sides and then rotate them down to a much more comfortable riding position. We recommend you have them angled down approximately 30 degrees. When retightening the brake levers, do not over tighten them, they are only plastic, and if you over tighten them you can cause them to crack. Check that the levers are level with each other, looking across from one side of the vehicle to the other, and then tighten them up on there. We are now ready to fit the bar pad to the vehicle. Remove the bar pad cover and then, taking a pair of scissors, carefully cut down one side of the bar pad. This allows you to slot it over the top of the handlebars, and you can now fit the bar pad cover. We are now ready to fit the front rack onto the vehicle and bull bar. Okay, we're now going to fit the front rack and bull bar section to the quad. To start off with, you will need an 8 spanner or socket and a 10 spanner or socket, and you're going to need to remove these bolts on each side and the spacers. The 10 spanner goes on the bottom to hold the nut, and then use an 8 ratchet undo the top section, undo the bolt. You'll also need to remove the 2 bolts from down here, and then, using a 5 Allen key and a 10 spanner, remove the bolts out of the bull bar section as well. First bit we're going to attach using the bolts removed from the lower section is the bottom section of the bull bar. Do not tighten any of these fully yet, because you'll need to be able to adjust them and move the sections around to align everything. Then take your rack and lift it up onto the front of the quad. And the bolts you remove from the back with the spacers will need to be reattached through. You put the bolt through the rack, followed by the spacer, which then realigns through the plastics in the frame. Once you've done this, take the bolts you've removed from the upper section of the rack and place them through with the washer and the nut on the inside. Start to tighten up the bolts you've removed, replaced. Now ready to move on to checking all the plastics are tight on the vehicle. Okay, we're now going to make sure that the front stub axle is tight on the vehicle. Using an 8 Allen key and a 17 spanner, make sure these are nipped tight so there's no side-to-side play in the stub axle, or up and down movement in it, as you can see there is in this one slightly. But while doing it, also ensure that your steering still turns freely. If you over tighten these, it can crush the bearings or cause the steering to become too hard for your child to be able to turn. Once you've checked the stub axle is tight, using a 5 Allen key, check the brake caliper is tight and the cable for it. Do not adjust the 2 threaded bolts or try to tighten these ones here. And repeat the process on the opposite side of the quad. Okay, we're now going to make sure the footwells are tight on both sides using a 5 Allen key and a 10 spanner. Make sure all 4 footwell bolts are tight, and at the same time check the ones on the opposite side. Using a 12 and 14 spanner, make sure that the rear swing arm is tight on the quad. Apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. We're now going to fit the shock bolt through on the rear shock absorber into the swing arm. To do this, remove the seat using the clip underneath and push the rear shock absorber down. Using one of the 2 remaining shorter bolts and nut that you had at the start of the assembly, we're going to attach the rear shock. The other bolt you've got is a spare bolt. Lift the rear swing arm up and align the shock. Using a 10 and 13 spanner, ensure that the bolt is tight. Using a 10 and 13 spanner, make sure your rear motor mount bolts are tight. There's 2 at the rear of the motor just here, and then there's 2 situated at the front of the motor. Once you have ensured that these are tight, again apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. The last thing we need to do now is to make sure that the brake caliper itself is tight on the vehicle. Okay, we're now going to make sure the rear brake caliper is tight on the quad using a 5 Allen key. Check all the bolts are tight that mount the caliper, including the cable pinch bolt. We're now ready to connect the battery and put the seat on the vehicle. Okay, we're now going to reattach the seat onto the vehicle. Front section sits in and down, so this piece here goes underneath the bar. Once you've got it pushed in position at the front, tap down firmly on the back of the seat and you should hear the clip bounce into position. Check that the front has clipped in properly. As you can see, in this case the front has not clipped in properly, so again we'll remove the seat and reattach it. As you can see, the front of the seat is now attached firmly, as is the rear.